Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 408 of the FCPA Compliance Report. Today, I have back with me Brad Davis. Brad is the CEO and founder of Eversolve. But before I get to Brad and today's podcast, a few words about an exciting new podcast which will premiere in December on the Compliance Podcast Network. Looking for the top new podcast in compliance? Look no further than Great Women in Compliance, a podcast with Lisa Fine and Mary Shirley, produced by One Creative. In this podcast series, Lisa and Mary will talk to some of the top female compliance practitioners literally across the globe about how they have achieved their position and what other women can do to move forward in compliance. It's going to be a great series. I'm certainly looking forward to it. Brad Davis is a data security expert, and today he visits with us about some of the communications and training that you need to put out to your employees to prevent data breaches. In large part, it is common sense matters, but the techniques, strategies, and tactics that Brad emphasizes are things that you can implement for not only your company, but your compliance function as well. It's a really fascinating way to look at something that is obviously very high tech, very high profile, yet the basics are about as straightforward as they come. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for another episode. We're going to take things in a little bit different direction today. Typically on this podcast, we talk about data privacy. But today we're going to talk about data protection, and really not what to do after you've had a data breach, but what are some of the things you can do to help prevent a data breach. I was recently visiting with Brad Davis, and Brad is actually my IT security guy. So we were in for a checkup, and he said something that really struck me as critically important around data protection, and that was social engineering. So, Brad, first of all, with that incredibly long-winded introduction, welcome and thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Oh, thank you, Tom. I appreciate you having me on the podcast today.
And I should have said that Brad is the founder and president of Eversolve. It's a technological solution service company located in, of all places, Lubbock, Texas. Go Red Raiders, I suppose. But you speak and work and have clients literally across the globe in this area, Brad. And yet one of the, if not the key defense mechanisms, compliance points, or other was something you called social engineering. So I was wondering if you can explain what that is and how that relates to really being on the front line of defense for a corporation around a potential cyber attack.
Certainly. Thank you, Tom. Social engineering, what that really is an attacker's attempt to extract some form of information from one of your employees, from one of your end users, and that's going to allow them to gain access to the network or maybe give them the next step in trying to perpetrate an attack on your network. So really what is vitally important in this area is end user training and helping end users to identify social engineering attacks, helping them to identify other forms of attacks, and then what to do in response to that when they see that coming, so that they're not accidentally giving out information that would help an attacker to gain access to your data.
So, Brad, what kind of got me thinking about all this is I was recently at a conference where one of the speakers works in the area of cyber attacks, and he talked about a large number of cyber attacks on a corporation which were essentially employees opening emails, and those emails had malware on them, and that malware didn't immediately extract information, but it allowed communication with the bad guys, and then it allowed the bad guys to do something really bad. So I was wondering if you could explain kind of that process.
Well, what you're talking about there is a standard phishing attempt. And so what we're seeing in the security space is that while the principles underlying the way attackers try to exploit information or gain access to a network aren't really changing, the techniques are pretty solid. The type of attack or the target of their attack does seem to be evolving. And so when we see emails open up or end users open up emails that have malicious code embedded in them or links to malicious code, really what we're talking about there is kind of a breakdown in end user training and helping them to identify what is a legitimate email, what isn't a legitimate email. And actually the overwhelming majority of exploits begin as an end user opening up an email and clicking on a link that seems very innocuous or maybe even just a little bit suspect, but doesn't immediately raise red flags. And so really the next step is to get them to automatically, in their mind, see those red flags and not take action that would enable those attackers.
So, Brad, the example that the speaker used, I thought was just almost horrifying, and it was the following. After a phishing attack where someone in the corporation did open up the nefarious document, malware was put on the company's server, the bad guys waited, and they waited until a point where the company was engaging in merger talks with another company. Those merger talks failed, and they've at least concluded late Friday afternoon, at which point the president of the company left on the company's jet. And during the time the jet was in the air, the company's chief financial officer got an email from the president telling him the merger had gone through and to wire transfer several $1,000,000 in anticipation or some type of fee around the merger to a offshore bank account. The chief financial officer received the email. It came from the president. It had the standard address on the president's email, so he executed the order, knowing the president was in the air and that he was not available. And then the next week, when the president returned to the office, the chief financial officer went to his office and said, "Here, I have the paperwork for you to sign confirming the instruction to wire transfer the money that I sent out." And that's when the theft was discovered, and of course the money was long gone. So is that type of I don't even say long con, but that type of phishing event leading to information that would not be known to the public, leading to a order by a superior to an employee to transfer money, is that something you have seen or come across in any of your work?
That is actually something we've come across now. I would say that we haven't seen the delay, I should say. And that really that case study speaks to, as I mentioned earlier, sort of the evolution of these attacks and how the attackers are really able to be patient and able to manipulate the situation as they need to. But what we have seen are requests for spoofed emails, so emails that are impersonated, to very high-ranking officials within an organization asking to wire money, something to that effect. So we do see that. Haven't seen, like you had mentioned, the long, drawn-out, very well choreographed, very well orchestrated attacks such as that. But the overall principle behind the spoofed emails and trying to have the person within the organization wire money is certainly something we've seen before, yes.
So as part of your training, Brad, are you able to reemphasize to companies that really no matter who you get an email from, it's always appropriate to double check. It's always appropriate to ask a question. There's probably a company control that requires it, but many people who work under a CEO, for instance, would not question if they got an email from a CEO. But as part of your training, can you communicate, hey, it's okay to ask if you get a request like that?
So much of our lives today seems to be just digital communication back and forth. And unfortunately, there is some breakdown that happens with that. And so that's number one that we talk about with end users is if something comes up that even just seems a little odd, the very first thing that needs to happen is to go face to face and have a conversation with that person or pick up the phone and talk to them in person, because it is unfortunately fairly easy for attackers these days to both intercept and then also to to spoof those emails back to the person to make it sound like it's a completely reasonable request and to move forward. And so the number one control is that person-to-person communication.
So the I guess, Brad, one of the things that stunned me is not the simplicity of these attacks, but the basic simplicity of the defense and the common sense approach you're asking companies to take. Is that a message that you feel, as a professional trainer in this space, really resonates in the marketplace?
It's very interesting you should ask that question, because it isn't a message that resonates until we start looking at the numbers, until we start showing our clients the numbers. The vast majority of exploits do come through emails. And so you, as an executive, or you as an employee, are really a vital piece of this protection infrastructure, the security infrastructure. And once we empower end users with that knowledge, that begins to resonate with them, to realize that they do in fact have an active part, that it's not just the technology on the back end that's keeping them safe, but that really they have a role to play, and it is their responsibility to play it. And once that message comes across, then we see people kind of perk up and get interested in this.
Brad, let me change the focus just a little bit, because perhaps you're in this situation as a small service provider, but I know I am, where I occasionally will have a company that will ask me to submit an invoice directly into their payment system. I have my own login, and I log in and I detail the things that they need for their payment system. Usually I need to attach some sort of hard copy backup. How does a company who uses that really for efficiency and perhaps for even payment compliance help protect against a nefarious attack?
So this is a fairly tricky situation, as you kind of mentioned. A lot of companies have vendors in which they work in this manner. And it boils down to understanding kind of what an overall email from this vendor should look like, how to log into that payment portal, what to look for when you're in that payment portal, what should send off red flags, all of these kind of common sense, and you mentioned earlier, very common sense steps that you as the end user should take in order to verify that the security is in place and that you're not being redirected to a malicious site, or you're not giving information away to a malicious third party.
So, Brad, one of the things you provided to me in preparation for this podcast was something called a USCERT, which is United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team Alert. This happened to be alert TA 18-2276B. But are there similar alerts that corporations or other persons would have access to that would help them understand kind of what's going on out there and some of the suggested defensive postures you can take?
I believe the alert that I had sent to you actually was regarding managed service providers such as Eversolve Technologies being targeted by these malicious third parties at an increasing rate. But yes, to answer your question, there are other alerts that are just right there on the USCERT.gov website. We actually monitor those very, very frequently. They kind of give us help us keep our pulse on the global cybersecurity scene, what trends are emerging, and it's a really great way for IT teams inside of large corporations to keep a pulse on that as well.
So, Brad, one of the striking numbers that hit me when I checked out your website was that in your section entitled By the Numbers, it says 70% of cyber attacks target SMBs with fewer than 100 employees. And it really gave me pause to think that even someone my size and much larger or some larger, but not a multi-billion-dollar company, could be subject to these cyber attacks. Are those the types of clients you work with and help in this type of training?
That is the type of client that we work with, and that really is the market that we target for. And this is really one of the specific needs that they face, is the need for cybersecurity, because the overwhelming majority, or I say again by the numbers, the overwhelming majority of attacks are perpetrated on companies in that small to mid-sized space. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they lack the resources or the know-how or the talent or whatever the case may be to adequately defend against, or to provide the internal end user training to help them identify red flags and things of those nature. So that is who we work with, because there's the need there with the respect to the cybersecurity, and also with respect to the business impact of cybersecurity.
Well, Brad, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if anyone wanted more information on either yourself or on Eversol or really even on any of the topics we've covered in this podcast, where can they go to find out?
Sure. So they can go to our website, www.goeversolve.com, or you can always give us a call, 888-755-7573.
So I've been visiting today with Brad Davis. He is the founder and president of Eversolve. We've been talking about what I still find fascinating, and I still just have to say the simplicity of it is just is too good to pass up, and that's the human element of social engineering around a robust cyber security program. So Brad, thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you for your time, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. If you have never given us a rating on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would do that. It would certainly help in our rankings and help us get the word out about the most senior podcast around in the compliance space. If you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. I hope you'll join me again next week for another episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.